we'll get started. What we're going to do right now is we have a list of edited questions that people responded to through our symposium registration form, and we will be asking a couple of them, both Eddie and Chip, and then if we still have time, we will open it up to audience questions for specific speakers or presentations. So, but first we're joined by another panelist who isn't a speaker, and he will introduce himself.
Thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Mike Joyce. I'm also a meteorologist in the Dayton area. I work for what is now called Dayton 24/7 now. At the time we were ABC 22 and Fox 45 News. We're still on those channels, but we've rebranded since the tornadoes. But I was not working that night of the tornado because I had just gotten married that weekend, but I did return to work as quickly as possible because of the severity of it, and spent several weeks out in the field nearly every day doing damage recovery and community recovery stories. So I really thank the Meteorology Club for inviting me to be here today.
So with an event of this magnitude, what kind of coordination occurred between the Weather Service, broadcasters, and EMAs before, during, and after the storms?
We always aim to have briefing material out to our emergency management directors and to the media in advance of more significant storms. As we've seen with this one, when we walked in that morning, the threat was not as high as we ended up seeing. So we certainly kind of increased the level of coordination as the day went on, but probably not to the extent that you would expect for an outbreak of this magnitude. But we're communicating with both media and emergency management on the NWS chat system that Mike is a big fan of, and we're a big fan that he's a big fan of it because it keeps the phone call volume down a little bit, which is good. But yeah, our goal is to always keep all three of those entities on the same page about the weather threat. And if that weather threat is changing, like this one did, we would like to be nimble with that and get the word out to them as quickly as possible. And I think we probably can use this case as an example where that system worked to an extent, but also we could have done even more with during the afternoon hours. That's kind of how it looks from my perspective. Either of the mics have any thoughts?
I agree, and if I remember right, it might have just been a marginal risk first thing in the morning and went up to slight fairly, maybe late morning, and then went up from there. But even before the watch was issued, I knew either from heads up emails that you guys send, which are great too. I knew it looked bad, so I think that communication went well. It's just I was so focused. It took several hours before I knew how bad it was in Dayton area too.
I'll just add, more broadly speaking, from a before standpoint, the National Weather Service, our office, we try to keep people ahead of the storms by maintaining those relationships well ahead of any type of weather that you have, whether that's an annual event such as our integrated warning team exercise, where we get emergency managers as well as media partners together to do almost in some sense a symposium that can be similar to this, but usually features a more hands-on piece. And then even when we go on and do storm spotter training, that's another opportunity for us to engage with the emergency manager so that when there is a storm and we need to come into their county to do storm damage assessment, we're able to have that foundational relationship already, and we can kind of almost pick up where we left off and get to work in response to a storm.
And even after the storm, a lot of our coordination in media is, of course, on NWS Chat. We have to get the information immediately out to the public in the best and most effective way possible. But even after the storm, we still try to meet up with the Weather Service survey teams to try to get an exact picture of what happened and the impact overall, so that we can continue to share the story and help people understand either how to help or how the community was impacted. So the partnership doesn't end when the storm is over. It does continue after or during the recovery process.
So if no one else has anything to add, our second question. There we go. All right. If no one else has anything to add, our second question is mainly directed at Brian Woods, since this is something he wanted to address during his talk, but it's also open to the entire panel, of course. And that is, there's a lot being done in the weather community nowadays to bring attention to mental health issues. So what kind of mental and even physical toll does an event like this have on the local meteorologists and also the emergency managers?
So the really interesting thing from my perspective is that I was not someone who was publicly facing. So I was not on TV, I was not issuing warnings, but what I did do was still, communicating with people who are important to me or people who are reaching out to me, asking me what was going to happen as I was trying to save my own family. As I mentioned, my wife was 4 months pregnant, and for me, not trusting where I lived in my house, the first thought that crossed my mind was my wife's pregnant, and if anything hits her when she's pregnant, we might lose a baby. That's pretty traumatic set of things to think about, because I wasn't just someone who had knowledge of this. And when you have the knowledge of what's happening, you know it's going to be really bad. And I mentioned in the call earlier, first time I saw that debris ball, I was just so frightened because I thought I was watching people die. Something that was showing that people were dying. And then for days afterwards, I worked long hours, not as long as some of them, but I would be out all day. I'd answer media requests, I'd have to respond to clients and do my work. I wasn't eating well, and I'd literally just go at the end of the day and go grab a large pizza and eat it because I ate all day. So very unhealthy place to be when you're talking with people and you're hearing their stories. It's a very stressful thing. I've been to numerous disaster sites and interacted with a lot of people on damage surveys, and them putting some of their emotional burden on you, and you want to hear their stories. It is very hard from a mental aspect because you're now carrying some of that weight. And I have a problem with releasing that, as I found out. The first day after I went to Hurricane Michael and I was in Mexico Beach all day, I was driving back to Destin, and I actually had to call someone else who I was driving in my own car in a caravan and say, please come drive for me because I had the worst headache of my life. And what I found out was just the amount of stress from getting up at 6 a.m., flying in, landing there at noon and getting right to work, and then hearing all the stories and not eating. I essentially just crashed. And there's a lot of people who are volunteers or first responders have similar stories because there's an emotional toll that comes from seeing a place that you know, and that was the big key for all of us. Is this is not something that is abstract from far away. I can go there and see the damage and kind of remove myself from it, but this is a place that I've lived for 14 years. It's pretty much my adopted home. And when it's people you know and the place that you love, it's very difficult to see people go through that. And it's very hard. And so for me, after this event, it was kind of a catalyst for me to start seeing a therapist. Because I just didn't know how to process all the complex feelings. And learning with coping mechanisms for every time I go out, whether it's here or somewhere else, on how to deal with that. And even going back and preparing this presentation, going back and reliving what I was feeling that night brought back an incredible amount of anxiety to the point where I actually had to shut down my computer, walk away, and start going through that. So I'm really heartened to see a lot more talk about mental health in society overall. As meteorologists, we're doing it more. At the National Weather Association conference, we had a 2-hour panel and then discussion on meteorologists' mental health because of the acute stress that you develop in these type of situations. For anyone else?
We have a local mental health board, Foundations is what it's called, and they were very involved in our EOC briefings, but of course small community, so we all know each other. Roberta, who her son, my youngest son, were in band together, so I know Roberta. Her husband used to be a deputy. She would drag me to my office every time she was in there. Set me down. She didn't give me a choice, you know. Hey, how you doing? And that was good. I could de-stress when I would get home because my wife would never mention the tornado. So she knew just let me, you know, I'd watch stupid stuff on TV, you know, just something to.
Yeah, part of being out in the damage and in different parts of the community every day was certainly very hard. When I came to my first damage site in Harrison Township on my first day on scene, it was 4 in the morning, pitch black, and if you're familiar with the Dayton area, this was at the Rite Aid, we're near Siebenthaler Avenue, right off of North Dixie. And it's right off the I-75 exit where the Hotel Dayton was destroyed, so no power in the area at all. And I get there and all of it is just pitch black and power lines down everywhere, and all there is a sheriff's deputy. And I'm very thankful that he's there to at least provide his headlights or something to see. And we were so stretched thin, it was basically me out there with a camera and a backpack transmitter doing it all myself in this area all alone. And I've been hearing reports of looters and all these dangerous things going on that are not weather related. And then I think the next day was where the stress really ramped up because the next day I was in Trotwood, and that's where I encountered the EF4 damage for the first time. And we were in front of a house where a woman who had lost it survived by hiding in her bathtub, and the wall had actually collapsed on top of her while she was in the bathtub, but the wall itself didn't actually hurt her other than a couple bruises, and her daughter had just brought her back to the house for the first time, so she was very emotional, and it was very tough to deal with that, you know, being an outsider to that community. But then, half hour later, another man who had his house was destroyed while I was doing a Facebook Live chased me out of the neighborhood and was calling me some nasty names and all that kind of stuff. And in that situation, you don't want to engage. I just shut my Facebook Live off and left, and I just sat in the car. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is day 2, and I'm already drained. I can't deal with the community's not wanting me here. But I woke up next day. We were in West Milton, and then we encountered a little girl, 7 years old, who started a laundry service for all the people who didn't have a washing machine or power or water, and that really changed my outlook on it and kind of powered me through the next few weeks of constantly being in devastation. So yeah, the mental health is just, the toll it takes on you is incredible, and with a lot of community members who are experiencing the devastation differently, I don't harbor any ill will towards that guy that chased me out of there. I mean, his house was destroyed. What can I say? He's reacting in a way that, isn't all that unreasonable for losing your home and all your possessions. So, but seeing the good in the community as well certainly helped and kind of helps you get through it too.
This question is specifically for Greg. What in the next year, 5 years, 10 years can we expect to change about tornado warnings, tornado emergencies, if you can tell us and it's not a government secret?
That's all we have in government secrets. So I go back to that slide I showed where it was just a bunch of numbers showing the 80 to 90% of tornadoes are very short, weak, short-lived, things like that. Again, all tornadoes are very important, but understanding that we're living now in a world where we use analytics in a lot of different ways. I go to the sports world a lot of times where, again, dangerous, life-threatening situations, sports, right? But still, sports, they use analytics to make more sound decisions on what pitcher should pitch that day, on how well the quarterback actually performed, instead of just the basic how many touchdowns and interceptions and yards did you throw. It's like, did he eat a ham sandwich that morning, and how did it affect his performance? So we're using data in better, more meaningful ways to kind of pinpoint at certain features of things we should pay more attention to. Numbers don't tell the whole story. There's a lot of other factors involved. But particularly with tornado warnings, we're trying to look at a better grading scale for the warnings themselves, instead of just saying all tornado warnings are equal to whatever, basically all tornadoes are the same. That when you look at how we grade ourselves in terms of tornadoes, that's how we do it. Did you hit? Did you miss it? And that's pretty much all we judge it. So I'm actually looking into metrics which define a better way to show our performance, kind of like a grading on a curve, if you will. You want to hit the big ones, and you want to hit them with the most effective lead time. I mean, there are even stories I could tell too. In Illinois a few years back, some guy could see the tornado, went down the street to the store to get something, and then came back and his house was gone. He thought he had enough time. You can't do everything about every situation, but at least we want to aim for what I call effective lead time. So we want to gauge tornadoes by how effective they are with the most lead time for the worst part of the damage of the storm, to the ability that forecasters can see that in the data. And if we can change the grading scale, if you will, of the tornado warning to show that yes, we're hitting the big ones with the most lead time, and that's the most effective way, then that can wrap back into the service to show maybe we don't need to issue tornado warnings for everything. Maybe we need to issue tornado warnings, maybe shorter ones for the environment that we have. And places like SPC are doing a lot of analysis to show that if forecasters can forecast, see what the environment is like, there are actually a lot of situations where you're not going to get over a certain level of tornado strength because the atmosphere just can't produce it. And so if you know that going into it, you can at least kind of evolve your services for that evening to that. Now, if there's an overachieving storm, you can pay attention to that and put more credence to it. But for the most part, you can judge that. So if we kind of change how we think about what happens after a tornado warning, how effective was it, then we can wrap that back to the service, maybe have shorter tornado warnings for certain events, longer tornado warnings for others. Obviously, then Andy wouldn't have had to issue a whole barrage and blitz of warnings for the same storm that's just going to keep producing tornado after tornado. Then you can kind of re-gauge and recouch that same warning for one event.
All right, and our final question for the panel before we open up to questions from the audience, and this is, we want every single person to answer this, hopefully, if you guys can. If you could persuade everyone in your own community to do one thing in preparation for severe weather right now, what would it be?
My one thing would be to make sure that you have a reliable way to receive warnings. I work for the Weather Service, but I don't have a NOAA weather radio, but I'm fairly confident in not only the excellent WIA alerts, so long as they're enabled, but also the FEMA app that's on my phone. Right now it's working splendidly for winter weather events to alert me. So that would really be the biggest thing. And if I can add a half thing or a second thing, it would be weather aware. For example, I don't tell my wife every day what the weather's going to be, but I make sure to tell her when there's that marginal risk of a severe thunderstorm or a slight risk of a severe thunderstorm, or when there's going to be 2 inches of snow. Kind of the more impactful weather. If there's a way that you can tell those around you, because if you're here, you're probably weather savvy. If you can tell those around you to have a heightened sense of weather awareness, that would be the other beneficial thing, in my opinion.
I would like people to take warnings seriously. We issue them for a reason. We issue them based on science and public service. And we want people to take them seriously. We want people to take action based off of them. They're part of that, that's on us. That we need to make sure that we're accurate with them. And as part of it, it's on them. That we need to make sure that when they're issued, that people can get to safety and then basically do what Kyle just said.
I think one problem that I run into, especially on social media, especially on large social media pages like the main station Facebook page, is the public is largely unaware of the difference between a watch and a warning. And I think it probably maybe needs to start young, when kids are in elementary school. And I remember learning about weather, but I don't think we ever really talked about what the difference between a watch and a warning is. And while we do go to schools and when we're invited, we can't hit all of the schools with a 3-person weather team to teach kids that. So I don't recall it happening in my curriculum. And I just think maybe we should start considering having weather safety as a part of school curriculum, because we get so many people that don't understand the difference between when a tornado watch and a warning is issued, and that's causing some trouble and possibly some of the reason why people aren't reacting to warnings when they're issued. So I think that would be a step forward, and of course, adding on to, trusting modern technology rather than antiquated technology is always a good thing too.
Where do I go from there? I mean, in the Severe program, at every program, we kind of developed a goal, a mission statement, something we want, even for space weather, for whatever group we're in. And mine sort of hit at, I would like people to understand the nuances that go along with severe weather. Severe weather evolves quickly, as you saw from all the radar images and the loops. Nothing lasts for very long. Even the tightest of couplets on a tornado goes like this and then it's gone within a couple minutes. And then another one about, weather evolves so quickly. I look on some Facebook feeds and a Weather Service office will put out a little radar image, and here's a storm, here's the current situation, and somebody in the comments will go, when's it going to hit us? And it's a town that's like 3 or 4 counties away, maybe on the other side of the county warning area, and there's no physical possible way that storm is going to maintain itself from here to there. So, and it's not all of us are meteorologists or should be meteorologists. I don't know, there are fields of science, I don't know anything about oceanography. So we don't have to know everything, but to let us help you with uncertainty. If somebody says 2 to 4 inches of snow, don't go, well, they said 4 inches. I would like to live in a world where not everything is just as black and white as somebody said the highest number, so obviously it's going to be that. And that's the same thing with severe weather. If you see a red risk around your area, that doesn't mean your town is necessarily going to be wiped out, and every single county within 400-mile radius is going to be gone. But understand that in little pockets of that, something could happen. So be weather aware, but understand that there's a very low chance of every single place being completely affected, but that we know that something could happen in that area. So then you can allow people in your sphere, your circle of influence, to understand that too. So not everybody is in panic mode from their early onset, but you're watching it and you're letting it sort of guide you through that, the day. Even if the forecast changes from a marginal and that we're kind of upping the numbers as they go on, allow us to kind of walk you through that and understand your own relative risk.
I agree with everything said, especially have more than one way to get, especially at your home. No weather radio and an app on your phone. And I'm not going to do everybody's app. FEMA's got an app. Most television stations have an app that do a very good job if you're in their area. Red Cross has one that's very good that you can set, like I have a son who lives in North Carolina, I got his. One goes to High Northern, I got his address in there. And it also follows you. So if you're driving along, if there's a warning on the tower, so McCall preached earlier, so my thing is tornado sirens. I did have only one person while I was doing things said, I'm not sure the siren's loud enough because we had to go out on our porch to see if it was blowing. I said, so you didn't know there was, well, yeah, I knew there was warning. I saw it on TV. So why and I wanted to yell, but they lost their house. I can't yell. It's just, sirens have their place. Weather does come up very quickly. You get those very quick summer storms. It may be an EFO or an EF1 tornado, a weak EFO, but if kids are out there playing baseball, that's not a good thing. And, nobody's paying attention to their phones, so that siren, we got 2 big parks in Salina, and they both have sirens. It's a good place to have those, but, people don't realize there's a delay there. The dispatch has to get the warning, and they've got to know weather radio, and they get it over their leads. But then they have to go to the console, punch up the sirens are going to set off, and hit the button. So, your phone app's going to go off about the same time the warning's given. My Red Cross app's usually going off same time no weather radio is. So,
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that people with snowfall forecasts always choose the high amount. They always do. But overall, humans tend to underestimate their risks. They call it optimism bias, where you think it'll never happen to me. And in Dayton, it always seems to happen in Xenia, to make it more contextual. But no matter where I go, and after an event, someone will say, I wish I had done this, this, and this. I didn't think it could happen to me. Even a low risk is still a risk, and it could happen to you. And is it how we communicate things? For instance, FEMA flood zones, they say you have a 1 in 100, if you're in a FEMA flood zone, it's a 1 in 100 year flood, or a 1% annual chance. And if you tell someone your house has a 1% annual chance of flooding, that also means I have a 99% chance that it won't. And most people will take that viewpoint instead of the 1% chance. But what we've come to learn is how we communicate that. Your cumulative risk over, say, a 30-year mortgage in that flood zone is 26%. So let's say within your mortgage, if you want to stay in your house for all 30 years, you actually have over a 1 in 4 chance of your house flooding. That will probably motivate someone to get flood insurance a lot more than saying 1% annually. So part of it is on us as risk communicators in the insurance industry, FEMA, National Weather Service. How can we message this in a way that people will not naturally jump into their optimism bias? For instance, after Hurricane Harvey, I met a lady who her house flooded, and she was literally the next street down from the FEMA flood zone, so she was out of it. But she just assumed that because the FEMA flood zone ended, and that's where the required flood insurance was, that if water ever came and flooded, it was never going to go past that theoretical line. But that was for a 1 in 100 year flood. Hurricane Harvey dumped 40 damn inches of rain in Houston. It was a 1 in 1,000 year flood. It was an extraordinary, we call it a black swan event. It's very rare, but it will happen. And so she just assumed that the water would magically stop at that area, and then she had 3 feet of water in her house, and she said, I wish I had flood insurance. She was relying on, you know, the FEMA grants and SBA loans and grants from any other nonprofit she could get. And it's a miserable thing if you don't, and I don't make any money on insurance whatsoever. My company does not, the department I work in does not write any insurance policies. But if people view insurance as optional when it's not required, the amount of work and stress and pain to make things whole after the fact is brutal. And so how do we change that? How do we motivate people to understand their risk better, not fall into that optimism bias? You know, if we have a tornado warning that says I have a 65% chance of a tornado hitting in the future versus 31% flash flooding, will people look at it and say I have a 35% chance of not being hit and a 65% chance of not having a flood in my house in this next 40 minutes? How do we message that in a way that motivates people to take action? In the insurance world, and trying to make people understand their risk or take action on doing things to their house that will remove their risk, especially for wildfires, for instance, keeping brush away from their house that'll ignite and catch their house on fire when a fire moves in. People can't think long-term in risk, for the most part. It's hard to do, even for someone like me. So how do we do that? But better understand your risk.
So we're going to open up the questions to the audience now. So if you have a question, we'll get the mic to you.
The question is for Mr. Robbins. Ooh, sorry about that. I was curious how Mark's IP and the communications overall worked for your county, and if you knew how it was with the other counties. I mean, were all the interoperations and all that able to, you know, work? Did everything work the way it was supposed to be, or did you have any communication issues?
It worked a lot better than it did in 2011 because by that time, that was when we were still on the old 800. When they went to the 700, we ended up with more repeaters on the tower we use. We went from 4 to 11. So we did, because our county is totally Mark's. And if you don't know, that's the multi-agency radio communication system. It's a integrated 800 system. You can talk, I got one out in my car right now. I could talk back to Salina if I wanted to with it. It's a statewide system. The Weather Service has those radios. Do you use them at times? it did work well. There were some things with the old VHS system, only you didn't hear anybody because they were garbled together. So I like the Mark system, any of the P25 system. It's not perfect. We did have some cell phone problems because of that one tower being down. You know, AT&T we had virtually nothing, and it was affecting the other carriers too.
Just a quick question for Greg and Mike, sort of jumping off of what both of you said. I like how you brought up that we need more communication perhaps with younger audiences, teaching the difference between a watch and a warning from a young age, because I run into a lot as well, people not simply understanding the difference when to people like us it seems second nature, and also then communicating probability. You know, people hear 2 to 4 inches of snow, 4 inches is what sticks in their head. Do you suspect it's more of a human nature thing, that it's tough for a lot of people to understand probability, or that perhaps maybe educating children or having more programs could help with that?
I think we have to look at what society needs in different times. You know, what you're doing on Saturday is vastly different than Wednesday afternoon or morning, or, you know, and this has always been the case. But more so, you know, a lot of people will get on their phones and they scroll through their news feeds and things like that. What is effective? You know, does the word watch mean anything? It's funny, what goes around comes around, and I didn't mention this in my talk, but the 65 and even the 74 outbreaks showed that there was language in there that said we should go to the tornado watch paradigm and severe because it works really well in the tropical world. People know what the difference between hurricane watch and warning is, and that was written back then. And so that's why we essentially have watches now. And we did a survey through the NWS hazard simplification, if you remember, and it's different for every weather hazard, really. So what is the difference between a winter storm watch and a winter storm warning, hurricane watch and warning, tornado watch and warning? And there were varying levels of understanding between them. And the thing about, once you institutionalize a thought, so if somebody wants a tissue to blow their nose, a lot of people say, can I have a Kleenex? You know, a soda. Some people say Coke. And there's these regionalized things. And so to do this nationwide, countrywide, for every demographic, from young people to all the way up, it's very difficult to pin down words. There are regionalized ways of looking at it. And so we could have words like watch. We can have words like warning. What we need to do is have the information along with it. So graphics are great, but graphic without context, without sort of words and qualifying it the right way, is probably not the right way to go. Same thing as words without a graphic. So there are a lot of ways that you need to develop sort of a common denominator thing for most people, and make sure sort of the high-end users of it, and then those that just don't have much of an idea or experience with it can also understand it too. What you need to do, kind of like we're talking about with no weather radio and smartphones, we just need to have a lot of different but meaningful things available for the people to gravitate toward what works for them.
And just to add to that, I think a lot of forecasting, especially in media, and somebody who communicates with the public frequently, is just the psychology of it. And I think recency bias is just a huge problem with a lot of people. One thing, not necessarily related to severe weather, but one thing you hear a lot is, oh, well, back in my day, we used to have snow on the ground for 5 months and it never melted. It's like, well, that was never true, but you're just remembering some of the snow days you had when you were a kid, you know. And I think that we talked about earlier today, the same thing. Well, tornadoes only happen in Xenia. You know, the worst of them are always in central Greene County. Well, we know that's not true, and now Memorial Day certainly changed that for a lot of people. But I just think that that's just a problem with human psychology in general that psychologists and social scientists are currently working to figure out, and we as meteorologists have to understand that that's going to be a thing, and we have to cater our forecasts to and our communication with people and interaction with the public to just understand that, you know, people will react that way, and you have to kind of talk them down a little bit sometimes. And there's a lot of people out there, and you know, it's tough to get to everybody, but just keep consistent and be persistent with that message.
Yeah, I have a question for Greg. The improvements in the warning because of policy changes have been big, especially reducing the area of false alarms so we don't have people in shelter, kids crying, you know, because of that. So that's great, and that's progressed. But I haven't seen the same improvement with verification. To count an EF0 miss for 30 seconds in a cornfield as a miss compared to the tornadoes that we had in Dayton, it's wrong. And we get blasted by the Cincinnati media if they have big tornadoes out over Indiana, and then the next day we are issuing for EF0 and 1 tornadoes, and they said that Wilmington office, they had everybody scared because they thought they were going to get the big tornadoes in, and they only hit 5 out of 7, which we're happy to hit 5 out of 7 EF0 tornadoes. So what are your thoughts about the future of verification?
My presentation could have been this. Because one of the first things I started when I became the program leader a couple years ago was this. This was my first thing I started to work on, because if you don't know, our government performance rating for each tornado warning, we have our own set goal as an average of 13 minutes lead time on every single tornado warning. That means every warning, even if it's the same tornado that's a long track, needs to have at least 13 minutes of lead time, no matter what intensity it ends up being. And again, if you have 80–90% of your tornadoes being the EF0s, 1s, and they're, by the way, very hard to detect and get a lot of lead time with them. And by the way, those measures were created 25 plus years ago, even before we had our radar network fully established. The reason that it hasn't really changed is because, or it didn't change progressively over time, is because we kind of had to figure this out as technology improved. It's just been the past 3 or 4 years that we've had 1-minute radar data at the lowest level scan. So things have changed in terms of timing, but now it's time. Now it's time to look into the analytics. And so I have been doing that, and I've been researching this to the hilt. And that's where I say we've got this sort of verification grading on a curve. So all of you took tests, and you understand a number between 0 and 1, right? If somebody said you got a 77% on your test score, you would understand what that was, generally speaking. 27%, right? 92%. So everyone understands what that quality is, and that's what I want to do with tornado warning verification, to where even if it was a tough event, but you got a decent amount of lead time, what I want forecasters to do is not worry about whether they're going to hit it or miss it. I want them to get an effective amount of lead time. So if it's in an environment that's favorable, I don't want them to wait 4 minutes till the next volume scan comes in. I want them to think mostly about how much lead time I'm going to get, because that extra 5 minutes might help. Again, I live in Norman, Oklahoma, and last year we had a QLCS tornado go through an area just outside of Oklahoma City. And it was one of those QLCS ones that just wrapped up very quickly, became a very narrow EF2 that dropped, went through a few mobile home houses, unfortunately killed 2 people. But there were a number of people that went to their shelter with 1 to 2 minutes of lead time on that. And I think, okay, so that was good, but what if they would have gotten an extra 3 to 4 minutes of lead time? Maybe that would have saved the other 2. And that's what I want forecasters to think about, not how they're going to be graded. And so what I'm proposing with this new enhanced grading scale, essentially, is taking that whole piece out of the forecaster's mind. So they're not even thinking about the measures or performance or what grade they're getting. They're just thinking about the lead time, about getting the effective lead time. So I'm actually working on that. I've got all kinds of milestones and things to go along with that. So I'm trying my best to work for you guys. And the great thing about that is the way that we have these analytics, or I'm trying to define them, it actually puts the power back into the what we call the science and operations officer to then go back and look at each event and work with the individual forecaster and say, hey, great job on these exact things. So you can actually look back in past events and see analytically where improvements could be made. Right now, how much work would that person have to do to go back in the event and look at, well, geez, you know, hey, match up the radar data? It's almost impossible. But with the new analytics, this actually helps warning performance because the training aspect basically solves itself.
Unfortunately, that will be the end of the panel. We are out of time. So thank you to the panelists for participating, and thank you to everyone for coming. Since the symposium is so early this year, we don't have an official date for the symposium next year, so stay tuned. And again, because it's so early, we haven't elected the new exec board, so stay tuned for the announcement of those. But thank you all so much for coming. Give our speakers and panelists one more round of applause. And I would like to thank Joshua Steiner for putting together such an excellent event, so give him a big round of applause. Also, thank you to the rest of the Meteorology Club and Exec Board and Scarlet and Gray Forecasting team. Hopefully we'll see you next year.